Welcome to Stage Time Podcast. I'm your host, Travis Valle, and something crazy just happened. So, for one thing, the guests that I had scheduled for this episode, unfortunately, we had a scheduling conflict, so we're unable to record. So, I decided to do another self-review, self-reflection of my first paid comedy gig. So, the first time I was paid to perform for people. Now, here's the thing. It is late, and I actually recorded this whole episode, but at the end I found out my microphone setup there was an error and no audio was recorded. So I talked for about a half hour to nobody. So I'm going to try this again. If this doesn't work, there's not going to be an episode Monday. So I'm sorry, but thank you all for sticking around. I do want to talk about my first paid gig, which was with this organization called Wicked Comedy. It is run by a guy named Vinny Lombardi. Vinny, he's a pretty cool guy. He's a veteran. We got connected through some mutual friends. I reached out and said, hey, can I get on one of your shows? He put me on a March 23rd, 2023 show. So a little over a year ago, I had my first show. This is kind of maybe a year after I got back into comedy. No, I'd been back into comedy for a little bit during this time. So I've been doing open mics. I've been building up all this material. This is the first time someone actually said, hey, here's money, perform for us. And I may have done some X2 shows at this point, but I didn't really count those. This is my first kind of independent gig where I got it on my own. And I was really excited. I invited out some family and friends. By family, I mean my wife, who almost never comes out to my shows, and some friends, including my pastor and his family. That's going to factor in a little bit later. I'll tell you about it. But I want to look back at my first paid gig and make some notes. Now, for the setup, it's at a place in Alexandria, Old Town Alexandria, at the time it was called Village Brauhaus. Now it's Alexandria Biergarten, put on by Wicked Comedy. So I wasn't restricted to any specific kind of content. I got to do whatever jokes I wanted. I handpicked the best jokes from my repertoire, and it actually went over pretty well. I was so surprised. I almost didn't film this because I was so nervous leading up to it. I didn't even really think about setting up a camera, but after my first two jokes landed, which you're not going to see because they weren't recorded, my wife decided, God bless her, to start recording and caught one of my best sets. And I it's kind of old now, so I can't, but this is what I normally refer to if I want to show somebody what my comedy's like. Now, again, this is pretty early. There's a lot to be cleaned up, but overall, I'm proud of the set, and I'm going to walk us through some of these jokes. Some of these jokes you probably heard before, all of them if you follow my channel and listen to my clips, but you can see me perform for a crowd and see how they react. And it's pretty fun. So I'm going to jump right into this. Actually, let me do this. We are starting now. I was really proud of myself because I edited in this little intro bit. I thought it made it look very professional.
I actually did grow up in Northern Virginia. I went to school. I remember when I was a kid, I got in a fight at school, and it wasn't the first time, so I got sent home. And my mom was super pissed. She was so mad, she didn't even yell at me. She said, you know what? I'm not even going to deal with you right now. Just wait till your father gets home. Let me tell you guys something. Waiting for my dad to come home, longest 20 years of my life.
So that was not my opener. My opener was about a friend who was an illegal immigrant. You can actually see that in my clips and stuff, and I believe I do that in other sets. Something that is important for an opener is that you get the crowd laughing right away. Now, for a little bit of setup, and this isn't to brag, I think this is kind of an objective thing, and my friends agreed with me. Other than the headliner, I was probably the funniest guy on this lineup. There was about 6 people, including the headliner, so me and 4 other people, including Heather Joyce, who is a very funny woman, but that night would not be what I would show people to showcase how funny she is. And some of the other comedians I don't know super well, but I hear they're funny. They just had an off night. The guy after me, as I recall, he was actually pretty good, but again, not to brag, I felt like I got the most laughs this night. So this joke that we started off with, it's one of my favorite jokes to tell. Um, and you can kind of hear in the beginning, I memorized this whole set. So because it's a paid gig, I made sure that I didn't have any note cards up with me, nothing that would distract my attention away from the audience and from my performance. So I weaved all these jokes together using a kind of mind palace segue tool where all the jokes connect somehow. And for my own benefit, my segues and setups are a little longer because I'm trying to keep myself on the correct train of thought and make sure that I don't miss any of my jokes and that I'm able to go through all the ones that I think will make the audience laugh the most. So when you're preparing for a gig, you want to make sure that you aren't using note cards. That's fine for an open mic, but for a paid gig, you want to devote all your attention to the audience. And you want to be able to respond to their feedback. And I do that a little bit, but I'm so locked in that I'm not going to do any crowd work. There's going to be one minor bit of crowd work. I am focused on making them laugh at my material. And I performed that joke pretty well, I think. Audience gave me good feedback. I am running off a huge confidence boost after my first couple jokes landed very well. Like I said, the comedian before me didn't do great, so I felt a lot of pressure to make the audience laugh, and they actually laughed way more than I was expecting. So you might be able to see some of that. Yeah, let's keep going.
That was one of the first jokes I ever wrote, by the way. When I started doing stand-up comedy, I had a much darker sense of humor, a lot edgier comedy. And for reference, I'm going to tell you another one of the first jokes I ever wrote. You guys ready? So I have this friend who has cancer, right? And, sorry, I screwed it up. Let me restart, sorry. Like I said, it's one of the first jokes I ever told. It's been a while. I had a friend who had cancer, right? No. He's not dead or anything. He's just a dick. We don't talk anymore.
So the key to that joke, and this was another thing I was very much preparing for, is the pauses. You have to space out the exposition, space out the setup, make sure that the audience is kind of invested, make sure they're listening, make sure they're processing, and then boom, hit them with the punchline. So that was something that, and it can affect a lot of people because I knew it happened to me before where I'd be on stage, and you can kind of see this in my early open mic video where I'm rushing through a lot of things. So I made a conscious note, I'm going to say pauses in between. However much time I think is passing, I'm going to double that because it's going to seem like it's going fast when you're on stage, but to the audience, you don't want to whiz by them. You want to make sure that they are processing, they are absorbing the exposition, the setup that you're giving them. That way they can better appreciate the punchline. And I think that joke, I did it very well. So I made conscious efforts to space out some of my, setup so that I'm leaving in pauses, giving the audience time to absorb, building that tension so that when I do my little plot twisty punchline, it really hits home. And I think this video is a good example of me doing that pretty well. So that was great. This joke I love doing. It's a lot of fun. And again, I was happy the audience responded because it is kind of a dark setup.
I've had a lot of terrible friends. I got this one friend who's like really pretentious and feels the need to show off how cultured and sophisticated he is compared to the rest of us cavemen. And he feels the need to critique everything. Like one time, we were drinking wine, and he very loudly and obnoxiously said, "This Merlot is disgusting. It's bitter, flat, and unfit for human consumption." I said, "Bro, we are in the middle of communion service right now. Can you not?"
Again, pauses are very important in that joke to let the tension hang and then hit him with that punchline. Something I've learned to do is when I tell those two jokes, I make them the same person. So the friend with cancer is also the pretentious friend. In this bit, I made them separate people. I've learned to make them the same person, not only because I think that makes for a funnier joke, but also it cuts out time for setup and exposition and all that stuff. So there's a little bit more segueing that you can cut out and the joke still works. So I did that. I do that now. And I've learned from this set, there's a lot of areas where I can chop up my jokes. Fortunately, they still laugh. The audience gives me quite a few cues that they are invested in the setup that I'm giving, even though it sounds like it's taking longer, because I took the time in the beginning to get them laughing very quickly. You want to get them laughing within like the first 20 seconds, get some laughs per minute, and make sure that the audience are on your side. Then later in the set, like towards the middle or end, that's where I kind of save all my longer jokes for. You can use up those points that you built up from the audience and say, this is a longer story, but stick with me. You know it's going to pay off.
I love doing comedy, but comedy's hard because just because you're funny out in the real world doesn't mean you're going to be funny on stage. I'll give you an example. Just by a quick show of hands, I'm not going to pick on you, but just by a quick show of hands, anyone here consider themselves like the class clown or the funny one in their friend group or anything like that?
Aaron's funny boy.
Okay. All right. Now think about this.
Okay, so that lady had been chiming in pretty much the entire night. She was drunk, and she decided to participate more than she was invited to. Now, at this point in my career, I don't do a lot of setup, I don't do a lot of crowd work. So I try to phrase that very carefully, where I'm getting the audience invested, but I didn't want them to respond verbally like she did. I think I even specifically said, by a show of hands, I'm not going to pick on you, but who here, thinks of themselves as a funny guy? And that can be one way to control the audience, but you have to understand as a comedian, if you ask a question, the audience is probably going to respond verbally, whether you want them to or not. So you have to be prepared for that. So if you say, does anyone here experience, you're probably going to have some people nodding yes, or verbally saying yeah. So you got to be prepared to handle that and respond and address it. You don't have to go on a whole tangent with it, but just be like, all right, cool guy, let me tell you this, and you can kind of create an audience connection there. But if you're not prepared for that, don't ask questions. If you're not prepared to handle direct audience feedback like that, don't ask questions. Just go along with your set. Asking questions can help, like I said, create better audience connections, but if you're not ready for it, it could get messy. So this lady, I kind of handled her in an okay way, where I was just like, okay, yeah, I understand. And I moved on with my set. Today, I might have had a little more fun with her. Back then, I was nervous. It was my first paid gig, and I really want to make sure I'm sticking with the time that I'm given. I was given about 10 minutes. This video is 8 minutes, 31 seconds because it cut out my first two jokes. But I'm trying to stick within that time limit because, again, as a professional, when you're paid for a certain amount of time, you don't want to go over that time. You want to make sure you're sticking within because that affects the comedians after you, that affects the establishment's business hours. It can create a whole snowball effect where you don't want to be the guy who screwed up everything for that night. So stick with your time. Respect the light.
When people describe you, would they say, that's the funny guy from work? Or would they say, that's the guy who makes a lot of jokes at work? Can you hear the difference? Hold on. Ladies, think about it this way. Would you rather be known as that pretty girl from work, or that girl who wears a lot of makeup at work? I'm just saying, I would have a very different reaction if I got off stage tonight and someone said, you are so talented, versus saying, you are so brave. Those are not the same thing.
So one thing I like about that joke, I don't do it that much anymore because I feel like it's a bit of an overused premise where you say, you're so brave. That's an obvious substitute or it's like a backhanded compliment where someone's saying, good for you for showing off something that you're very bad at doing, So I don't do it as much anymore. I was very proud of it at the time, but also the way I set it up, I have little laugh checkpoints. So they're like mini punchlines in the bit where you can hear the laughter build. So it starts off kind of a chuckle, then it's more of a laugh, and then the punchline hits the hardest. Like the very end, they should laugh the hardest at the end of your bit. So I deliberately set it up that way. And the lady, again, when she interrupted, I didn't want to insult her or try to, get her or, roast her or whatever, because I don't know how well I am at that at this point, and I want to make sure the audience stays on my side. So I kind of acknowledged, I was like, okay, but let me finish this bit. And for the most part, she respected that. She does interrupt a little bit, later on. But for the most part, she was probably quietest during my set too, because everybody's, again, not to brag, but everybody's kind of engaged in my stories. I won them over early on, and that pays off throughout the rest.
As a stand-up comedian, one thing I've never really been comfortable with is crowd work. Where you pick someone out and you ask them questions like, what do you do for a living? Are you married? Things like that. Because one time I was at a comedy show, and the host picked this guy out of the crowd, started questioning him. Comes to find out, this dude found out his wife was cheating on him, was going through a bitter divorce. So the comedian, upon hearing this, decided, that's comedy gold. He proceeds to make fun of this guy for like the next 10 minutes, and the whole audience is just laughing at him. Can you imagine? Imagine you're this guy. Like, you go out, you're trying to get a drink, trying to have a good time, forget about your problems. All of a sudden, some guy on stage decides to humiliate you in front of the entire room. Can you imagine how traumatizing that must be? Anyway,
So, kind of what I was saying, that was a longer setup, but you could hear the audience audibly reacting to some of the things I was saying. I was building that tension, and they were invested. So that was, I was only able to do that because I won them over earlier. And they're willing to stick with me in these longer stories, and they're actually going to pay attention and listen. So when they give you good feedback like that, you could also acknowledge it and be like, I know, right? And, kind of engage with the audience a little bit more. Again, I'm kind of starting off, so I didn't play around as much. I want to stick to my time. But that, again, gave me a little bit of confidence boost because I know they're listening. And I paid off with a punchline. And that's a fun bit to do, where I kind of set up. And that's based on true story. I've talked about this in my podcast multiple times, where I was uncomfortable doing crowd work because of that story, basically. Since then, I still do that joke every now and then, but I trim it down significantly. And also, not everybody laughs at that. The comedian thought that was comedy gold. That was a bit of an unexpected laughter, and it doesn't always hit, so I've trimmed that out. So I try to make the story a little bit shorter, and I paid off as much. I actually don't do it that much now because I do like to do crowd work now, so it doesn't quite sell, but it was a fun bit, and it paid off here. And if you notice, too, the pause at the end of that joke is very important. The pause between me saying, can you imagine how traumatizing that must be? And so what do you do for a living? I specifically took a drink to make sure I took that pause long enough. However much time you think you need, double it, because it's going by much faster on stage. So be conscious of those pauses. Let the audience hang with that tension a bit before you send them home.
Like Vinny said, I'm a Marine Corps veteran. I served in the Marine Corps for 5 years. When I first enlisted in the Marine Corps, I tried to mentally prepare myself for any possible trauma I might face, things like anxiety, injury, death. But the one thing I could not prepare myself for was the unbelievable number of penises I would see in 5 years.
All right, so there's two things that happen here. One, I'm about to go into a longer penis joke, no pun intended. But I invited my pastor out to this show, so I was a little nervous how he would respond. But they're actually, I can hear them in the video. I can hear him and his family laughing at the joke. So they, fortunately, that went over well. They weren't offended. I don't do a lot of sexual jokes because I personally don't find it very comfortable to do, and it's not always super accessible to the audience. But here, I try to be as professional by saying penis instead of big swinging dick or something like that. Well, as you're about to hear in the story, that's really not the case. Ultimately, I like this joke. Also, they're laughing at that bit, but I start to cut them off. That's something you try not to do in a comedy set. If the audience is laughing, let them laugh. Don't start until they kind of let that die down, because if you cut off their laughter, that might train them to think, oh, we're not supposed to laugh yet, and they might hold back from laughing at points where they are supposed to. So One thing I would have done here, again, they do laugh, and that's great, but I would have let them laugh longer now before I continued with the rest of the story. But I think this is probably, again, me being nervous about keeping the time. So,
aside the showers in boot camp, my job was a prison guard. So, as a prison guard, we had to watch the prisoners 24/7. Not only that,
lady interrupted a little again, but again, I don't want to take time out of my set. I'm in the flow, so I kind of ignore her. I look in her direction, but I don't really acknowledge her.
time they left the facility for a work detail or a court hearing or whatever, when they came back, we had to conduct a strip search. It's during one of these strip searches that I saw the smallest penis I've ever seen. I consider myself a professional, but I'm not gonna lie, when that prisoner dropped his pants, it took every fiber of my being not to burst out laughing. Ironic thing too is, crime the dude was in for? Indecent exposure. I don't know how he got convicted. I knew he was naked and I couldn't see a damn thing. It just looked like he had a second mounting belly button. After the Marine Corps, I used the GI.
All right, we're about to get into a joke. Let me see something real quick. Do that just so I don't have conflicting audio. We're about to get into a joke that actually went viral when I clipped it and put it on Instagram. It got over 1 million views on Instagram. It's titled Trans Employee. So you can already tell it's going to be about a sensitive topic. I specifically wrote this joke because, not because I'm trying to be an edgelord, but because I like the idea of taking a sensitive topic and making it accessible to everybody. Now, some people kind of clam up at the beginning of this joke because they think it's going to lean one way politically or the other. But I think the punchline is pretty good at bringing everybody into the game. You are going to hear some different reactions. I don't want to say mixed reaction because overall I think the joke is successful here, and I think it's successful online. It got a lot of likes, got a lot of comments. Not all the comments are positive, but when I do my material, I'm not specifically trying to offend anybody. I just like taking topics that are sensitive and making it accessible to everybody. So it's not about, oh, I'm going to get them real good with this one. It's more like, let's see if I can get everybody in on the joke. I think that's really important when you touch on sensitive topics. Get everybody in on the joke. Don't exclude, include. And I think this joke does a good job of doing that.
I went to school, became campus security, eventually got promoted to supervisor. When I worked as a supervisor, one of my employees under me came out as trans. Born biological male, transitioning to a woman. And so we had to go to my office, we had a long conversation about what that would mean in the workplace. And I was very supportive, and I made a promise that she would be treated like the real woman that she is. So I lowered her pay by 20%.
So you hear a lot of audible laughter. You heard one lady, if you listen closely, you can hear one lady say, not cool. But there is the kind of groaning laughter like, oh, I shouldn't laugh at this, but I am. That's kind of what I was going for. Now, it's not really meant to be divisive. I thought that was a good way of bringing everybody in on the joke. And again, it went kind of viral on Instagram for a few reasons. One, I had good timing because it was during Pride Month, so I got to use all the Pride hashtags, and it was a topical joke. Two, it covers a sensitive topic that I think when people see trans employee in the thumbnail, they're like, oh no, let me see what this is about. And they might go in thinking they're going to hate it and end up loving it. Some people still hate it, but I think that worked out. And three, I think the audience reaction also sells it. So when you have a joke and the audience kind of is in on it, I think that helps get other people in. It's this kind of crowd effect of other people are having a good time, so I'm having a good time. This next joke I'm going to do is, oh, by the way, I should also say that trans joke, it's not based on reality. The only thing that's true is I did have a job as campus security at JMU. I didn't have an employee. I didn't lower anyone's pay. but I just feel it's important to point that out. This next joke might be a little more divisive because it is inherently political. It's titled "Political Jokes." This one got pretty good movement. Unfortunately, this one is going to be a bit dated, and depending on what side of the political spectrum you're on, you might not like this joke. But
I usually try not to get too political with my jokes, but I will say I did grow up in a very Republican household. Everybody in my family is a Republican, which is why we were so shocked when we found out that my grandma voted for Joe Biden in the 2020 election. Weirdest part about it was, she died like 20 years ago.
So this joke actually did better than I thought it would, especially in this area. I'm going to say it again. This happened in Old Town Alexandria at a place called Village Brauhaus, now Alexandria Biergarten. I didn't know what the political leaning of this audience was, so I went for this joke, and it landed, and I thought it was pretty good. It's not meant to be divisive specifically, but I think it inherently is because it mentions a particular candidate. But I think everybody can get in on this joke because they're aware of the sort of ideas and controversies surrounding the 2020 election. Now, unfortunately, because it is about a specific moment in time, it is going to be dated. So I'm not going to be able to do this joke, a year from now. I might not even be able to do it now, really. Biden's still in office. He announced his retirement as of recording here, August 2024. So come November, or really, I guess, come January, this joke might not be relevant anymore. So I'm going to try to milk it out as much as I can, and people laugh at it, so I go with it. I haven't really had a time where it's failed, to be honest. Maybe I just get lucky with the audiences. Maybe it holds up on its own merit. But this got a lot of hate comments in the video clip. So if you want to go through my channel, look at that video clip, get in on the conversation, by all means. Drive up that traffic. Yeah.
I had a lot of weird jobs throughout my life, comedian, prison guard, campus security. I used to work at an animal shelter where I euthanized cats and dogs. Till the shelter found out, then I got fired.
Alright, so this is kind of the bread and butter. This I did in my self-review of one of my first open mic sets. I did this joke, and I like to work this joke in whenever I can in a set. It's quick, it's dark, and audience usually has a good sense of humor about it. I've won them over at this point. So, like, if this was the first joke I did, it probably wouldn't work out as well. But I did edit out the part. I self-edited, like I didn't say it where I mentioned the abortion clinic because my wife is there and she doesn't like that additional part, so I've chopped it out. Overall, went over well, and I try to work it in when I can. Usually it ends up being like a non sequitur. But I am coming up on my last joke. I got the light. One thing I want to take time to mention here is I think it's very plain to see how much more comfortable I am in this video than I was in my 2017 open mic video. Like, my posture, the way I'm speaking, it's a lot more confident. I'm a lot more relaxed. I probably downed a drink or two to kind of get up some liquid courage, but I practiced this set so many times. Like, I just rehearsed it over and over. I did it for my wife. I did it while I was driving. I did it, I'd lock myself in a room and just go over it to make sure I had it down, make sure that I knew what I was going to say. I knew what order I was going to do them in. I wasn't going to miss any jokes. And I think it just really paid off. But I'm really about to drive it home with this last joke, which is a longer joke, but I've built up that audience credit because I've made them laugh so much up to this point that they stick with me on a longer setup. So I saved the joke with the longest setup. And this was my closer for a lot of my sets around this time. And I bring it home. And it's the Schindler's List joke.
It's all right. I was ready to move on to bigger and better things anyway. I will tell you,
I just heard something. You can hear a guy say, "That's dark." I love it.
For this last story I'm going to tell you, I'm going to need you all to stick with me on this one, okay? Real quick. Anyone in here seen the movie Schindler's List?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so I already screwed up part of this joke, but I still managed to get him at the punchline. The way I normally set it up is I just kind of directly from the previous joke, out of nowhere, I say, anyone seen the movie Schindler's List? And that usually elicits some kind of reaction. And I didn't do that because I followed up with, I know that's a weird way to start a joke, but just stick with me. And that usually gets a chuckle. I did it backwards. I said, for this next one, I need y'all to stick with me. I should have done that because that kind of killed the setup for the early part, and it just increased the length of the exposition. So that was a mistake on my part. I do it better in later videos. You can see me do it at the Beards and Broadway show, which is also on my channel. But for the most part, the joke's unchanged. I think it's good in its form, and we'll just go on with it.
Good. I know that's a weird way to start a joke, but like I said, just stick with me on this. Okay. For those of you who haven't seen it, it is based on a true story. It is a powerful illustration of the horrors of the Holocaust. And I was watching it one night, and my young niece walked into the room, saw the scene where the little girl in red is being carted off with about a dozen other dead bodies. And it upset her. She starts crying. And she says, "Is that little girl dead?" And I freaked out. I didn't know she was in the room. I jumped out. I was like, no, honey, she's not dead. It's just a movie. It's fake. It's not real, all right? And I calmed her down, and I sent her back to bed. And I thought that was the end of it. Till a few weeks later, I got a phone call from her school. Turns out they started learning about the Holocaust, and my niece told her teacher, "Uncle Travis said it's fake. It's not real. No one died." All right. My name's Travis Valle. You can find me at Travis Valle Comedy. Thank you all.
All right. And, hey, I forgot I put these at the end of my videos. At Travis Valle Comedy, follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, if you're not already subscribed. So yeah, that was my first set. Wicked Comedy presents Travis Valle at Village Brauhaus, now Alexandria Biergarten in Old Town Alexandria. That set gave me so much confidence. I loved the audience reaction. I loved my friends and my wife's reaction to it, and it just made me think. It validated me as a legitimate comedian. I got paid. Everybody had a good time. I was just over the moon after this set. So I still look back at it, and I'm pretty satisfied with it. There's a few things I would edit out stylistically and for time, but overall, I think I did a pretty good performance. The only things I would change is I'd make the segues and setups shorter, I'd clip them, cut them, whatever. I might have engaged directly with the audience a little bit more, and I'd let them laugh a little bit longer in certain parts. Other than that, I was very happy with the set. And this was kind of a good start to me doing a lot more gigs, which, by the way, probably a good time to mention. I'm part of Dwayne White's comedy competition, Fall Fling. I'm going to be in the third round, which is going to be this Friday, August 23rd at the Electric Palm in Woodbridge. So if you're in the area and you enjoy my set and you want to hear me do some other jokes, come on out, support me, and fingers crossed, I'll make it to the finals. But yeah, I love this set. I took home the poster. It's still up on my wall. And I love this video. I used to send this video. It's kind of outdated now because it's over a year. Most people want within like the past 3 to 6 months when you submit to producers. But I used to send this video in as a reference for how decent my comedy was. It had a lot of laughs per minute. And I was just really happy. And it made me feel good. I did so much prep work for this. I tried to make sure that I was prepared. I had all my jokes down. I picked the best jokes for my material, and it really paid off. Tell you a quick funny story. Other thing about my pastor being there. This is the bit where if you go back to the Heather Joyce episode of this podcast, this is where my pastor's in the audience. She went up after me. As she was going up on stage, I told my pastor, "Oh, I've heard her before. She's really funny." And then she opens up with a joke about female masturbation. And I just cringed so hard. My pastor didn't laugh at it. A lot of people, I think, were a little off-put by it initially. and I just felt so weird for vouching for someone who started off with a sex joke to my pastor. So that was a funny story that came out of it. But yeah, overall, um, it was a good set, and this is one of the things that kind of pushed me to stick to it. And I think I won over the respect of my wife as a comedian as well. My wife looked at it as kind of a hobby, and I mean, she still does to an extent, but I think this provided the validation that I actually am funny and I can successfully make audiences laugh. So, bit of a tip for comedians who are starting off: don't invite your friends to every single place you're doing comedy. Like open mics, it's not worth it. Save that credit up for when you have a paid gig and you need people to turn out. And that way they can see you at your best. Open mics are not your best. Open mics are when you're trying out stuff. And if they see you, if you beg and plead with them to come out to an open mic and they come out and you bomb, they're not going to come out to any of your other shows. But if you have a paid gig where the audience is kind of preparing for laughter and you have your best material, they're more likely to support you. So my friends, thankfully, they still support me. They come out to my gigs when I have gigs in that area, and it's a good way to build up that kind of credit. So big takeaways from this: get the audience laughing early, do your quick jokes up front, make sure you're pausing and taking time between setup and punchline and throughout your bits so that you can build that tension and really hit home the punchlines, and stick to your time, and make sure that you save your longer jokes for the end after you've built up that audience credit. So yeah, that's my first set. If you like this, please, again, like, follow, subscribe to Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. You can also find this podcast on Podbean, Apple Music, Spotify. Share it with your friends. I haven't monetized my channels and stuff yet, but I can do that if you all support me. So if you like this stuff, please make sure you're following, sharing, letting other people know. Side note that, because I mentioned this the first time I recorded this, the trans joke that went viral, that was demonetized. So I'm not monetized yet on Instagram, but that I got a notification specifically saying this video cannot be monetized because of the sensitive topic. But it's still got 1 million views, so I'll take that. Yeah, so I'm hoping to have a guest next week. So please stick around, tune in, and if you have any questions for me as a comedian, producer, host, or just anything you want to know about stand-up comedy in general, I might be able to answer them, or the guests I have on, who most of them are more experienced than me, they can answer them, and they can give you some insight into what it's like being a comedian. So submit those questions either through Instagram, Facebook, or comments in YouTube, and we'll be sure to answer them on the air. And we'll credit you too. If you don't want to be credited, let us know. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. Stick around for next Monday, and you can find this video on my YouTube page, by the way. I'll link it in the description below. But yeah, keep laughing. Oh God, I really hope this saved the audio.